Hello everyone. Before we start, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment with where you from and what time it is. That way, YouTube will keep pulling you stories like this. Now, let the shadows take over. Back when I was 22, I worked the overnight shift at a small gas station off Highway 71 in Minnesota. It wasn't anything glamorous. 2 pumps out front, a cramped little store inside with humming refrigerators, buzzing fluorescent lights, and a back office where the manager's golden retriever, Daisy, would usually curl up on an old blanket. The official title they gave me was night manager, but really, it just meant I was the only one willing to work alone from 10 at night until 6 in the morning. The pay wasn't bad for someone my age, and at first I actually thought it was going to be an easy gig. I figured most nights I'd just drink coffee, watch YouTube on my laptop, maybe knock out some schoolwork when things were slow. And for the first few weeks, that's pretty much how it went. Most nights were dead. A couple of truckers stopping for fuel, some local teenagers grabbing energy drinks before heading to a party, maybe a drunk stumbling in for cigarettes around closing time for the bars. After midnight, the highway outside would go quiet. No cars, no voices. Just me, the dog, and the hum of the coolers. That silence was the strangest part. At first I thought I liked it, and it gave me time to think, time to relax. But after a while it started to feel different. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, pressing in on me like the whole world outside had gone dark and forgotten me. I'd hear things sometimes, the faint creak of the roof, the pop of the metal siding, even the door chime going off once or twice when the door never opened. Daisy would prick her ears up at the same noises too, which told me it wasn't just in my head. I'd shake it off, telling myself it was just the building settling. But deep down, I already knew that place wasn't right. It was early December when everything happened. The kind of cold where your breath freezes the second it leaves your lips and the air feels like glass in your lungs. That night I remember the highway was dead. The only light in the lot came from a flickering street lamp and the glow of the pumps. I was restocking chips on the shelves when I noticed something that froze me in place. Pump 3's screen flickered on. The bright green glow lit up through the window as if someone had just swiped their card. I glanced outside expecting to see a car, but the lot was completely empty. No headlights, no taillights, no footsteps crunching in the snow. Just the screen flashing, waiting for someone who wasn't there. I walked slowly to the counter and reset it, telling myself it was a glitch. Those pumps were older than me, breaking down all the time. But as I sat back down and sipped my coffee, I couldn't stop glancing outside. Something about it bothered me more than it should have. The screen lighting up like it was ready, like it was waiting. But no one had pulled up. Not long after, Daisy started growling. Not barking, growling. Low and steady, the fur along her back standing up like static. She stared at the glass door, lips curled, and that's when I saw him. A man stood outside the entrance. He wasn't moving, wasn't knocking, just standing there. His hood was pulled low over his face and the shadows kept me from seeing his eyes, but I could feel them on me. That heavy, prickling awareness of being watched settled into my chest like ice. I forced myself to stand, to walk slowly behind the counter. My voice cracked as I called out, asking if he needed gas. Nothing. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, still as a statue. 30 seconds passed, maybe a minute, before he finally turned and walked away. No words, no car, no sound of footsteps on the frozen ground. One moment he was there, the next he was gone, swallowed by the night. I stood frozen behind the counter, trying to make sense of it. Maybe he was drunk, maybe he wandered off the road, maybe he was homeless. I told myself anything that would make it normal, but my gut wasn't buying it. I checked the lot again. Empty. The highway stretched dark and silent in both directions. That's when the banging started. 3 heavy thuds from the stockroom wall. Not faint creaks, not settling pipes, banging, like fists hammering the metal siding. Daisy bolted out of the office, barking furiously, claws scratching against the tile. I nearly dropped my coffee, grabbed the baseball bat from under the counter, and forced myself toward the back. My legs felt like lead, every step echoing too loud in the quiet. The overhead bulb buzzed faintly when I opened the stockroom door, casting pale light over rows of soda cases and boxes of snacks. Everything looked normal, except the back exit door was wide open. Freezing air poured in, whipping the bulb overhead until it swung on its chain. The deadbolt dangled loose. I knew I had locked it at the start of my shift. That was the first thing I always did. My hands shook as I slammed it shut, twisting the bolt back into place, breath puffing out in frantic clouds. I told myself maybe I'd forgotten. Maybe I was tired. Maybe. But deep down I knew. I was halfway back to the counter when the door chime rang. My heart nearly stopped. I spun around, expecting to see someone standing at the front door, but it was shut tight. No one had come in. The bell had just gone off. Daisy barked again, this time at the cooler aisle. My stomach turned to ice. I looked up at the security monitors, and that's when I saw it. The cooler aisle camera flickered with static, the image warping in and out. Through the haze, a shadow slipped between the shelves. Not clear, not distinct, but unmistakable movement. I gripped the bat so tight my knuckles went white and forced myself toward the aisle. My shoes squeaked against the floor, too loud, betraying every step. Daisy growled low, close to my leg, ears pinned back. The aisle was empty, but one of the cooler doors was open, just a crack. The cold light spilled out in a thin line across the tiles. I swallowed hard, pushed it shut and backed away. When I got back to the counter, I felt sick. The phone sat there glowing faintly in the dark, but something else sat beside it. A small silver Zippo lighter, scratched, old, and engraved with one word. Soon. I hadn't left it there. Someone had been standing at the counter while I was in the aisle, inches from my phone, inches from me. I dialed 911, my voice shaking so bad the dispatcher had to ask me to repeat the address twice. She told me to stay calm, stay on the line, and that officers were on their way. But before I could say more, I heard it. From the cooler aisle. Low. Calm. A whisper that cut through me like a knife. You left the door unlocked. I nearly dropped the phone. Daisy lunged toward the aisle, barking so hard I thought she'd choke. My blood ran cold. The dispatcher's voice sounded far away as I pressed myself against the counter, staring at the aisle. Breathing. That's what I heard next. Long, steady, slow breaths. Like someone standing just out of sight, savoring the moment. Then footsteps. Careful, deliberate, circling the aisles. They dragged it out, never rushing, like they knew exactly how much fear each sound planted in me. The dispatcher said officers were minutes away, but minutes felt like eternity. The footsteps stopped. Silence. Then 3 knocks. Not on the front door this time. On the glass of the cooler. Tap, tap, tap. Daisy went insane. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. Just stared, frozen, waiting for the figure to step out. And then headlights filled the lot. Red and blue strobes lit up the windows. The sirens screamed. I bolted for the door, unlocking it for the cops, nearly collapsing when they rushed in. They swept the aisles, checked every corner, every shelf. Nothing. No one. The Zippo lighter was still sitting on the counter. They bagged it, asked me 100 questions, but the answers didn't matter. Whoever had been inside was long gone. I quit the next morning. Never stepped foot in that station again. But sometimes, when I drive down Highway 71 late at night, I glance toward the boarded-up building. And every time I swear I see Pump 3 flicker on, glowing green like it's waiting. And in the back of my mind I hear that whisper, clear as the night it happened. You left the door unlocked. When I was 19, I got my first real job working at the Ridgemont Public Library in Ohio. It wasn't exactly the kind of work you brag about. But for someone just out of high school, it felt good to have something steady. My parents liked the idea that I was working somewhere safe too, not a gas station or a late-night diner. The library had a reputation in town, big old stone building from the early 1900s, the kind of place with tall windows, marble steps, and a carved oak front desk that had probably been there since the day it opened. During the day, the place was busy. Parents brought kids for story hour, older folks camped in the newspaper section, students buried themselves in homework. But at night, after 9 when we closed, the place transformed. The lights hummed louder, the air turned still, and the silence inside that building started to feel unnatural. Closing shifts were quiet, sometimes too quiet. My job was mostly shelving returns, helping lock up and occasionally running errands for the head librarian, Mrs. Allen. She was in her 60s, stern but not unkind, and she treated the library like her personal kingdom. Everyone respected her. She had rules about how things were done, and one of her strictest rules involved the basement. The basement was technically the archives, but in reality, it was a concrete dungeon beneath the library that most staff avoided. The door was down a short hallway near the staff room, fitted with an old brass key, and it always smelled faintly of mildew and old paper. I didn't have any reason to go down there, until one night Mrs. Allen asked me to take a box of old magazines to the center table. I remember asking why the center table specifically, and she just said, "That's where everything belongs until I sort it." I wasn't thrilled, but I carried the box down. The stairwell was narrow, steep, and colder than it should have been. My footsteps echoed on the stone as I descended. At the bottom, a handful of dim bulbs dangled from the ceiling, giving off just enough light to cast shadows that seemed too long, like they belonged to someone else standing nearby. The shelves were crammed with bound newspapers, dusty boxes, old town records. I tried not to look too closely. I set the magazines down on the heavy wooden table in the center, then left as quickly as I could. The smell of damp stone clung to my clothes the rest of the night. From then on, I hated that door. Even walking past it on the way to the staff room gave me chills. A week later, I was closing by myself for the first time. Normally another staff member helped, but that night Mrs. Allen had left early and the others were gone. I had the whole library to myself. It should have felt peaceful. Empty aisles, all the tables cleared. But instead, the emptiness pressed down on me. I went through the motions of cleaning, humming to myself just to fill the silence. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Not above, not outside. From below, from the basement. I froze in the hallway near the bathrooms, my heart thudding so hard I thought I might pass out. The sound was distinct, slow, steady steps pacing across the stone floor underneath me. I tried to tell myself it was pipes or the heater, but no. I knew the difference between building noises and footsteps. These were footsteps. Every instinct told me to ignore it, lock up, and leave. But part of me felt I had to check. I walked to the basement door, clutching the keys in my fist like a weapon. The door was closed, the lock engaged. I leaned close and cold air drifted from the gap at the bottom. Too cold. I pressed my ear to the door and held my breath. For a few seconds, nothing. Then, a long, slow inhale. Someone was breathing down there. I backed away, locked the outer latch twice for good measure, and tried to laugh it off. I finished my shift faster than I ever had and practically ran home. But the basement wasn't done with me. The following week I had 2 more late shifts. Each time I heard something from down there. First it was footsteps again. Then it was the sound of papers rustling, as if someone was slowly flipping through a newspaper. One night I swore I heard humming. A man's voice, deep and steady, carrying faintly up the stairwell. I never opened the door. But someone, or something, wanted me to. One night I came back to the circulation desk after doing the bathrooms and froze. On the desk was a book I hadn't checked in. The binding was cracked leather, no barcode, no library stamp. Inside the front page was a note in slanted handwriting. "You should not have opened the door." I dropped it like it was burning me. My hands shook. I never logged that book, never saw it again. Mrs. Allen never mentioned it. But I knew someone had placed it there, waiting for me to find. Things escalated from there. I'd be walking through the aisles and I'd feel the air change, like I was being watched from below. The basement door would creak faintly, as if pressure was being applied from the other side. Sometimes I'd find the hallway colder than the rest of the building, cold enough to see my breath. And then came the night that broke me. It was a Wednesday, dead quiet in the library. Snow was falling outside, piling against the big glass doors. Around 9:30, as I was finishing up, the power went out. 1 second the fluorescent lights buzzed. The next I was standing in blackness so complete I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. My phone light barely cut through it. At first I thought it was the whole building, but then I noticed something. The emergency lights had kicked on. All of them, except one. Only the light above the basement door glowed, a faint red circle like a beacon in the dark hallway. Then came the knocking. Slow, deliberate knocks, echoing up the stairwell. I froze. The knocks came again. Louder. 3, then silence, then 3 again, and then a voice. "Come back." It wasn't shouting, wasn't whispering, just low, calm and steady, reverberating through the stone. I felt it more than heard it, deep in my chest, like the building itself was speaking. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The air grew colder, and the voice came again, closer this time. "Come back." I bolted. I don't remember unlocking the front doors, don't remember the run across the snowy lot. All I remember is sitting in my car, shaking so badly I couldn't get the keys in the ignition. The next day, I told Mrs. Allen. She didn't look surprised, she didn't laugh it off. She just nodded slowly and said, "You won't be on nights anymore." When I pressed her, she finally admitted something. Decades ago, back in the early years, the library basement had been used as a makeshift holding cell. During Prohibition, police had no proper jail in town, so they kept drunks, vagrants, and troublemakers down there until morning. Some of them never left. I quit soon after. I couldn't take it. But to this day, Ridgemont Library still stands, though it's long since shut down. People in town say if you drive past late at night, you can see that faint red emergency light glowing behind the basement door, even though the buildings had no power for years. And if you stand close enough, if you're foolish enough to press your ear to the door, you'll hear the knocking. And sometimes, you'll hear the voice. "Come back." When I was 26, I worked as a night security guard at Greenfield Cemetery in Pennsylvania. Most people don't realize cemeteries even hire overnight guards, but ours had a history of vandalism. Teens sneaking in to drink, headstones knocked over, flowers stolen right off graves. Management thought having someone on the grounds overnight would scare off troublemakers, so they posted the job. I had just quit a warehouse position and needed work fast, so I took it. At first I thought I had scored something easy. How much trouble could there be watching over a graveyard all night? But I learned quickly that boredom isn't the worst thing you can feel out there. My shift ran from 11 at night until 7 in the morning. They gave me a small shack near the front gates, just big enough for a desk, a chair, a space heater, and 4 monitors connected to cameras placed around the cemetery. One faced the main gate, one was trained on the chapel, and the other 2 covered opposite ends of the graveyard. I was expected to log patrols every hour, walking the gravel paths with a flashlight and checking for trespassers. In the beginning, I treated it casually. I brought thermoses of coffee, snacks, even a book or 2. I'd sit in the shack with the heater humming, watch the monitors for a while, then make my rounds. The first week felt almost relaxing. But there's a difference between being alone at night in your apartment and being alone at night in a graveyard. The silence is different. Heavier. The dark feels thicker, like it's pressing against your skin. Even with floodlights positioned throughout the grounds, the shadows seemed endless. Rows of headstones stretched in every direction, glowing faintly under the lamps, and beyond them was only blackness. On foggy nights, the light would scatter and twist, making it look like the figures carved into the stones were shifting when you weren't looking. I kept telling myself it was in my head, but that didn't stop me from jumping at every owl call or twig snap. About 3 weeks in, I noticed something unusual on the monitors. It was close to 2 in the morning, and I was leaning back, half asleep, when movement on the north camera caught my eye. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, but when I leaned closer, my chest tightened. There was someone standing among the graves, a man. He was tall and thin, but the grainy feed made it hard to see more. He wasn't moving, just standing there, facing the camera. Protocol required me to investigate. I grabbed my flashlight, logged the sighting, and headed out into the cold. My boots crunched against the gravel as I followed the path. The beam of my flashlight shook because my hands wouldn't stay steady. The air bit into my lungs, each breath a visible puff in the dark. When I reached the area, there was nothing, just stones and silence. I swept the beam back and forth, checked behind every monument, but the figure was gone. I returned to the shack, trying to convince myself it had been a glitch on the feed. The monitor now showed empty ground. The next night he was back. Same spot, same time. I stared at the screen for nearly 5 minutes, debating whether I had the nerve to check again. Finally, I forced myself out there. But again, the spot was empty. For 3 nights straight, the same thing happened. Around 2 in the morning, the north camera would show the figure standing among the stones, unmoving, as if waiting for me. Every time I went to check, he was gone. On the 4th night, something changed. The figure tilted his head upward, directly at the camera. Even through the static, I thought I saw his mouth moving. My breath caught in my throat. There was no audio feed, but I swear I heard a whisper threading through the silence of the shack. One word, drawn out, almost hissed. Stay. I slammed the monitor off, heart hammering, then turned it back on. The feed was empty. The following morning, I told my supervisor. He smirked and said, "Night shifts do that to people. Cemetery plays tricks on you." He laughed it off. I didn't. Over the next week, the figure started appearing closer. At first, a few rows back, then closer still. By the 6th night, he looked like he was only 20 feet from the camera. His face was shadowed, but I could feel him watching me. I stopped eating on shift, stopped reading, stopped relaxing. I just sat in the shack, gripping my flashlight, staring at the monitors with dread. Every creak of the heater, every gust of wind through the trees made me jump. Even at home, I couldn't sleep. I'd close my eyes and see the figure standing silently among the graves. Then came the night. Everything escalated. It was late January, bitter cold, fog rolling low across the grounds. Around 2, all 4 monitors flickered at once. Static hissed through the shack, filling my ears. I cursed and tried resetting the system. After a few seconds, the feeds returned, and I almost dropped my coffee. All 4 cameras showed the figure, not just in one part of the graveyard, on every screen at the same time. 4 identical men, tall, thin, faces lost in shadow. Each one standing inches from the lens, tilting his head in perfect unison. My stomach turned cold. I stumbled back, knocking over the chair. That's when the audio kicked on. We weren't supposed to get audio on those feeds, but through the static came a voice. 4 voices overlapping, perfectly timed. Stay. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The word hissed through the walls, vibrating in my chest, filling every corner of the shack. Stay. 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 I couldn't take it. I grabbed my flashlight and bolted out into the fog. My boots pounded the gravel path as I swung the beam wildly. Stones stretched endlessly, shadows twisting. But the voices followed me. They weren't coming from the shack anymore. They were rising from the ground, dozens of whispers low and steady, seeping up from the graves themselves. I felt my knees give. The air thickened, every whisper blending into the next until it felt like the entire cemetery was speaking. I don't remember how I made it back to the shack. I remember fumbling with the door, slamming it shut, and curling in the corner, too scared to breathe. When I finally looked, the monitors showed nothing. Just empty graves under fog. I quit the next morning. I didn't even wait for my paycheck. Months later, I ran into a guy who had taken over my shift. His voice was shaky when he asked me if I had ever seen someone on the north camera. I wanted to warn him. I wanted to tell him to run. But I couldn't bring myself to say it. I just shook my head and told him it was probably a glitch. Because here's the truth. That cemetery doesn't want guards, it doesn't want protection. It wants you to stay. When I was 28, I worked as a temp assistant for a large insurance company in downtown Chicago. At the time, I had just moved into my first real apartment, and between rent, bills, and student debt, I needed the money badly. I didn't care much about the work itself, but it paid more than retail and felt like something stable I could build from. Most days were easy enough. Lots of data entry, sorting files, running errands for managers. But sometimes, especially near the end of the month, they asked me to stay late. If you've never been in a corporate office after hours, you might think it's peaceful, but it's not. During the day, the 24th floor was a buzzing hive of keyboards, phones ringing, co-workers moving in and out of cubicles. But after 9 at night, when everyone else left, the floor changed. It was the kind of silence that makes you hyper-aware of every little sound. The buzz of fluorescent lights overhead, the distant thrum of the elevators, the air vents rattling. You notice things you never pay attention to when the place is alive. The way the computer screens cast faint glows in empty cubicles. The way the glass walls reflect shadows that shouldn't be there. The way the rows of desks stretch out like a maze with no end. The first late night I stayed past 10. I was finishing scanning documents. I was the only one left on the 24th floor. Even the cleaning crew had gone home early. Around 11:30, I went to the break room for water. The entire far wall was glass, giving a wide view of the city lights glittering below. I leaned on the counter, staring out at the skyline, feeling that strange emptiness of being alone in a space designed for hundreds of people. That's when I noticed something odd in the reflection. Behind me, in the glass, I saw the cubicles, row after row, but one of them wasn't empty. A figure sat at a desk, hunched over, shoulders slumped as if typing. I spun around instantly. Nothing. Just the rows of cubicles stretching silent and still. My stomach tightened, but I laughed nervously, telling myself I must have seen my own reflection distorted in the glass. I filled my cup and went back to my desk, trying to shake it off. 20 minutes later, I heard typing. Not faint, not muffled. Loud, rapid keystrokes from somewhere on the floor. I froze, listening. It lasted maybe 10 seconds before stopping. I stood, peered over the cubicle walls, but every computer I could see was dark. My palms were sweating as I sat back down. When I looked at my own screen, my heart dropped. A Word document was open. I hadn't opened it. And in the middle of the blank page was a single line typed in black text. "Why are you still here?" I shut it immediately, pulse hammering in my ears. I told myself it must have been running a test or someone had remote access to my computer. But the explanation felt hollow. I left early that night, ignoring the unfinished work. The next morning, I mentioned it casually to my supervisor. I expected her to laugh, but instead her expression went stiff. "You were working on 24?" she asked. I nodded. She hesitated, then said quietly, "Don't stay late on that floor. If anyone asks, tell them I told you no." And then she walked away. I thought about pressing her, but something about her tone made me decide not to. I should have listened. A week later, I got roped into staying again. End of quarter meant mountains of paperwork. By 10, the place was dead. I was alone again on 24. The silence was suffocating. Around 11:15, the lights flickered once, then again. Half the floor went dark, and that's when I saw him. At the far end, between the cubicles, a man walked slowly down the row. He was tall, wearing a suit that hung loose on his frame. His head tilted sharply to one side, as though his neck couldn't hold it straight. He dragged one hand along the tops of the cubicles as he moved. My body went cold. He didn't make a sound. He didn't even seem to be walking so much as gliding, each step oddly jerky, unnatural. I ducked back down, heart racing. When I peeked again, he was gone. I forced myself to keep working, though my hands trembled on the keyboard. At 11:45, it started again. Typing, not from one place this time, but from everywhere. Dozens of keyboards clattering all at once. I stood horrified and saw the glow of monitors across the floor. Not screensavers, but documents open, words appearing line by line. I crept closer to one and saw the sentence forming. I died here. The hairs on my arm stood up. I backed away, every instinct screaming to run. That's when I heard a sound behind me. The man stood 2 rows over, his head still tilted, jaw hanging slack. His eyes locked on mine. And without his lips moving, I heard the words as clearly as if they were inside my skull. Stay with me. The typing grew louder, every monitor flashing, every keyboard hammering in unison. The sound was unbearable, a frenzy of clicks and clacks that filled the air like static. I bolted toward the stairwell, yanking the handle. Locked. My only escape was the elevator. I sprinted down the hall, the pounding of phantom keys following me. The elevator dinged, doors opening slow, too slow. I risked a glance back. He was closer now, moving stiffly down the aisle. His jaw seemed broken, hanging lower than it should, and his body jerked unnaturally as he closed the distance. I threw myself into the elevator and slammed the button for the lobby. As the door slid shut, he reached the row near me. His head tilted further, almost upside down, and he whispered again, right into my mind, "You're not leaving." The doors closed just before he reached them. I didn't sleep that night. My body shook for hours. The next day I tried to convince myself I imagined it all. Stress, sleep deprivation. But that evening, my phone buzzed. A notification. New document saved. I opened it. It was from my work account. The file name was You Stayed. I quit a week later. I never went back. But every now and then, when I'm up late working at my new job, I hear phantom typing in the silence. And sometimes, when I check my folders, I find a document I didn't make. The same line every time. Stay with me. The first night something happened, it was nearly 2 in the morning, and I was halfway down aisle 16 when I heard the crash. A box fell from the very top shelf, 30 feet above me, and exploded on the concrete. Cans rolled across the floor, clinking into the dark. The sound echoed so loud in the empty warehouse that I thought the whole place was coming down. My first thought was that I'd accidentally bumped the shelving with the forklift earlier and loosened it. But the more I looked, the less sense it made. The box hadn't tumbled by accident. It had been pulled. The cardboard edges were torn in a way that looked like fingers had gripped it and yanked it forward. That was the first night I realized the warehouse wasn't as empty as it should have been. I should back up. At the time, I was 21 and desperate for work. Rent was overdue, my car payment was hanging over me, and I would have taken anything that gave me a paycheck. The warehouse job seemed like a blessing. It was a food distribution center on the outskirts of Columbus, Ohio. They shipped bulk goods to restaurants and grocery stores. My shift ran from 10 at night to 6 in the morning, which most people avoided. But I figured I could handle it. All I had to do was keep track of inventory, prep a few pallets for the morning crew, and make sure the forklifts and scanners were locked up. During the day, the place was chaos. Dozens of workers shouting, forklifts zipping back and forth, trucks slamming into loading bays. At night, It was just me and a building big enough to swallow you whole. The warehouse stretched for what felt like miles. 30-foot shelves packed tight with boxes, rows so long they disappeared into shadow. Even when you knew you were the only one inside, it never felt like it. Sounds carried strangely. A single cough could echo like footsteps. A dropped pen could sound like someone slamming a door 3 aisles away. The first week was uneventful. I passed the time sweeping, logging deliveries, and listening to music in one earbud just to drown out the silence. But the longer I worked, the more that silence started to feel unnatural. It wasn't peaceful. It was watchful. After the box incident in aisle 16, I tried to shake it off. Told myself I'd been careless. But 2 nights later, while doing another walkthrough, I heard it. Footsteps. Not mine. Another set. Slow. Heavy. In the next aisle over, I froze mid-step, holding my breath. The sound stopped when I did, like whoever it was didn't want me to hear them. I called out, my voice echoing off the concrete. Hello? Anyone in here? No answer. My flashlight beam shook as I turned the corner into aisle 17. Nothing. Just boxes stacked to the ceiling and shadows stretching long across the floor. I told myself it was in my head. But after that, I started rushing my rounds, avoiding the darker aisles whenever I could. The next week, things escalated. I was scanning barcodes near the loading bay when the overhead lights flickered. The buzzing fluorescence dimmed, then flared back on. At the far end of the warehouse, something slipped across an aisle. Too fast to make out. My gut clenched. I grabbed the crowbar we kept at the desk and walked toward it, every step echoing too loud. When I reached aisle 12, the sound hit me. Cans rolling. Not 1 or 2, dozens, tumbling across the floor in a stream. I swung my flashlight, the beam cutting through dust, and my stomach turned cold. The cans weren't falling from a box. They were spilling out from the shadows, one after another, as if pushed by unseen hands. Then, high above, my light caught it. A face. Wedged between 2 boxes near the top of the shelving. Pale. Expressionless. Eyes wide and glassy, staring straight down at me. The second the beam touched it, the face vanished back into the dark. I stumbled backward, cans crunching under my boots, my pulse hammering in my ears. I didn't finish that round. I went straight to the shack by the office door and sat there with the crowbar across my lap until dawn. The next day I nearly quit. But rent was due and quitting wasn't an option. I told myself it was exhaustion, tricks of the light. I went back. By then I had developed a ritual. Coffee in the break room at midnight. A slow patrol through aisles 10 through 20. Then a long sit at the desk, pretending to do paperwork while mostly just listening to the hum of the building. That night, though, something was wrong the moment I stepped inside. The air felt colder. The silence felt heavier. When I reached aisle 16, my stomach dropped. Every single box along the lower shelves had been pulled forward, all hanging an inch off the edge. Dozens of them, perfectly lined, like someone had walked the row, tugging each box one by one. I stood frozen, my breath clouding in the air. The urge to run was so strong that my knees shook, but I forced myself to step back slowly, never turning my back to the aisle. That was the night I stopped drinking coffee. I didn't want any reason to step away from my desk again. The last night I worked there is burned into me forever. It was late January, bitter cold outside, and around 2 a.m, the warehouse went dark. Not a flicker, not a surge, just total smothering blackness. The hum of the lights cut out, and the silence was so complete that I could hear my own pulse. I fumbled with my flashlight, the beam weak compared to the void. I was near aisle 20 when I heard it. A voice. Low, raspy, right behind me. You shouldn't be here. I spun, flashlight jerking across empty concrete. No one was there. My hands shook so bad I nearly dropped it. I started backing toward the bay doors, every nerve screaming to run. But as I turned into aisle 18, the light froze on something that made my breath stop. A figure crouched at the far end. Thin. Too thin. Its limbs wrong. Too long. It clutched a box in its hands, head tilted at an angle that wasn't human. Its eyes were wide, pale circles reflecting the light. For a long second, it didn't move. Then, in one violent motion, it hurled the box down the aisle at me. It exploded against the floor, cans rolling in every direction. I ran. Behind me, footsteps thundered. Not echoes. Real pounding footsteps chasing me through the aisles. Boxes crashed around me as if the shelves themselves were shaking loose. I sprinted toward the bay doors, fumbling with the keys, hands slick with sweat. The footsteps closed in faster than I thought possible. I slammed the emergency exit open and burst into the freezing night, gasping so hard I nearly collapsed. I never went back. The next morning I quit over the phone. Didn't even collect my last check. But 2 weeks later, a friend still working there called me. He said he'd been pulling pallets in aisle 16 when he heard boxes shifting above him. He swore he saw a pale face peeking down between the stacks. He said he wasn't going back either. Later, I found out the story. Years before I was hired, a worker had been crushed when a shelving unit collapsed. He'd been working overnight, alone. They found his body buried under dozens of boxes. Now, they say, aisle 16 is never really empty. The bell on the front desk rang even though no one was there. That was the very first night I worked the graveyard shift at the Ridgeway Motel, and it was the moment I knew I'd made a mistake. The Ridgeway sat alone on a desolate stretch of Route 50 in Indiana, the kind of road where you could drive 20 miles without seeing another gas station, diner, or building. It had about 15 rooms, a neon vacancy sign that buzzed more than it glowed, and a parking lot cracked with weeds. It was the sort of place truckers and drifters stopped when they had no better option. The kind of place you notice in passing but never want to stay. I didn't want to work there either, but I didn't have a choice. I had just gone through a brutal breakup, lost my apartment, and needed money fast. The manager, a man named Carl, who looked like he hadn't slept in a decade, didn't ask many questions. He just told me the pay was low, the nights were long, and don't waste time on room 7 unless you absolutely have to. I thought that was a joke. It wasn't. My first week was uneventful. Nights at the Ridgeway were monotonous. Sometimes a trucker would roll in after midnight, dragging himself through check-in before collapsing in bed. Sometimes a couple on the run from something, or someone, would check in cash only, and I'd have to pretend not to notice. But most of the time it was just silence. The kind of silence you feel in your teeth. The lobby was tiny, faded carpet, a cracked vending machine, and the front desk with its little brass bell. Behind me was the key rack, an old wooden frame with hooks for each numbered room. During the day it looked like nothing special, but at night, when the fluorescent bulb overhead buzzed and the lobby windows reflected your own face back at you, it felt like the keys were eyes, watching. The bell ringing on its own startled me so badly I nearly fell out of my chair. It wasn't subtle. A sharp, clean ding. My first thought was wind. But the lobby door was locked, the air dead still. I circled the counter, checked the lot, peered into the darkness beyond the neon sign. Nothing. Just empty asphalt and the endless black ribbon of Route 50. When I got back inside, one of the keys was missing. Room 7. I hadn't given it out. I stood there staring at the empty hook for a long time before shaking my head. Maybe Carl had forgotten to put it back earlier. Maybe I was imagining things. The next night, it happened again. I was sipping coffee behind the desk around 1 a.m. when the phone rang. The motel phones were ancient, beige rotary things with a faint buzz on the line. I answered. Front desk, Ridgeway Motel. No response. Just silence. Then after a long pause, breathing. Heavy. Slow. It crawled into my ear in a way that made my stomach turn. Hello? I asked, voice shaking. And then a whisper. so faint I almost thought I imagined it. He's still in there. The line went dead. I checked the lot. Empty. Checked the key rack. Room 7's hook was bare. My skin prickled as I walked down the hall, flashlight beam shaking in my hands. Room 7's curtains hung open. The room was dark. I unlocked the door. The bed was perfectly made. Bathroom clean, towels folded. No suitcase, no shoes, no one inside. It was as if no guest had ever entered. I locked it back up and hurried to the lobby, every nerve in me screaming to leave. But I stayed. The following week was worse. Keys vanishing from the rack and reappearing in the morning. The bell dinging at random hours. The phone ringing only for me to hear silence, or sometimes that same voice whispering things like, "You shouldn't be here." By the fourth night, I was shaking every time it rang. One night, a man actually walked in, middle-aged, clean-cut, in a dark coat. He smiled politely, asked for a room. His voice was calm, but his eyes were wrong. Flat, empty, like marbles. I gave him room 7 without thinking. He nodded, took the key, and left without another word. 10 minutes later, the desk phone rang, breathing again. Then the same whisper. "He's still in there." I froze, blood rushing in my ears. I checked the lot. His car was gone. Checked room 7. Curtains open, room untouched. The key still missing. I barely slept the next day, and when I returned that night, Carl was at the desk. He was pale, tired, and muttered, "Don't let room 7 bother you. You're not the first." I pressed him, but he just shook his head and left me alone. That was the night I saw the writing. Around 3 a.m., the bell rang. This time I didn't check the lot. I just sat frozen until the phone rang immediately after. My hand shook as I picked it up. The voice was clearer this time, sharper. "Look in the mirror." The line went dead. My chest tightened. Against every instinct, I walked down the hall to room 7. The door stood open. My breath fogged in the cold air as I stepped inside. The bed was unmade, sheets tossed onto the floor. And on the mirror above the desk, written in condensation, were the words, "Still here." I backed away slowly, heart hammering so loud I couldn't hear anything else. The door slammed behind me, rattling the frame. I ran. That was my last shift. The next morning, I quit without notice. Carl didn't look surprised. He just nodded and said, "You lasted longer than most." Later, I learned what happened in room 7. Years ago, a traveling salesman checked in late one night. By morning, the maid found him hanging from the ceiling fan. Police said it was suicide, but the staff swore they heard noises from his room for weeks after. The motel never told guests. They just kept renting the room. The Ridgeway still stands today. The neon sign still flickers on Route 50. Travelers still check into room 7. Most leave by morning, but some nights, if you ask the night clerks, they'll tell you the same thing. The bell still rings when no one's in the lobby. The phone still carries whispers. And if you're unlucky enough to check into room 7, you'll learn the same truth I did. That room is never empty. The first time I heard the crying, I was mopping the 6th floor surgical wing of St. Mary's Hospital at 3 in the morning. At first, I thought it was someone watching TV too loud in another room, or maybe sound carrying strangely through the vents. But the longer I listened, the more I realized it wasn't a show. It was the raw, uneven sound of a child sobbing. I froze in the middle of the hallway, mop dripping onto the tiles. No children were supposed to be on this floor. The 6th wing had been shut down for years. I should back up. When I was 29, I was desperate for steady work. Bills were piling up, and I couldn't afford to be picky. That's how I ended up taking a janitor position at St. Mary's Hospital in Virginia. Most people picture hospitals as busy, bustling, fluorescent-lit places, and during the day that was true. But at night, especially in the unused wings, they felt less like places of healing and more like mausoleums. Day crews handled the active floors, ER, maternity, recovery. Night crews like me got assigned to the forgotten spaces, the old offices, the dusty stairwells, and most of all, the sixth-floor surgical wing. On paper, it was being renovated. In reality, it was abandoned. The walls were yellowed, the paint bubbled, the lights flickered more often than they worked. The air always smelled faintly metallic, like dried blood that had seeped into the grout years ago. I wasn't the first cleaner assigned there. In fact, when the supervisor handed me the keys, she gave me a look I didn't understand at the time. Tired. Pitying. Like she knew I wouldn't last. "Don't overthink it," she muttered. "Everybody hears things up there. Just keep your head down and get your hours in." The first week was tolerable. The sixth floor was unsettling, sure, but I convinced myself I was imagining things. Shadows stretched too far. The hum of the old vent sometimes carried voices that weren't there, and more than once, I locked a door only to come back 20 minutes later and find it cracked open. I blamed drafts, old hinges. Then came the crying. It started faint, almost like it was buried in the walls. High-pitched, uneven sobs, the kind of crying you can't mistake for anything else. Every hair on my arms stood on end. I followed it down the hall, past the nurse's station and the dark operating theaters, until it pulled me to the far end. The sound was loudest at a door marked "Storage." The knob wouldn't turn. Locked tight. And the second I rattled it, the crying stopped. I stood there for a long time, chest tight, before forcing myself back to the elevators. I didn't sleep that morning. The next few nights it happened again. Always around 3 in the morning. Always at the storage door. Sometimes it was just sobbing. Other times I swore I heard words hidden in the crying. A weak, broken, "Help me," stretched thin like it was carried on a breeze. I tried telling my supervisor. She didn't even flinch. "Yeah, people hear things up there. Ignore it." Then she walked away. That should have been my cue to quit. The second week, things escalated. I was scrubbing inside OR 3, an old surgical theater with cracked tile and dangling lights, when I heard footsteps in the hall. Quick, light, like a child running. I stepped out, flashlight in hand. The hallway was empty, but when I aimed the beam at the floor, my stomach dropped. Wet footprints, small, barefoot, leading down the corridor toward the storage room. The door was ajar this time. I should have left. God, I should have left. But I pushed it open. The room smelled wrong. Sharp. Metallic. The kind of smell that sinks into your clothes. My flashlight beam shook as I swept it across dusty shelves and scattered boxes. At first it looked empty. Then the light caught movement in the far corner. A little girl. She couldn't have been more than 7. Hospital gown hanging off her thin frame. Hair tangled, skin grayish like paper. She stood facing the wall, shoulders trembling with quiet sobs. I whispered, "Hey, are you okay? Do you need help?" She turned her head slowly. Her face wasn't right. It was blurred, like water smeared across glass. No eyes, no mouth. Just shifting features that never settled. A cold wave washed over me, and then the voice came, not from her, but from the walls, the ceiling, the floor, everywhere at once. "You shouldn't be here." The door slammed behind me so hard the shelves rattled, boxes toppled, cans clattered across the floor. My flashlight flickered. I slammed my shoulder against the door until it burst open, and I stumbled back into the hall, gasping like I'd been underwater. I didn't finish the shift. The next morning I demanded to be reassigned. My supervisor just shook her head. "Nobody lasts long on 6. That was all she said. I should have quit on the spot, but I needed the money. So I went back. The final night, the 6th floor broke me. It was after 2 when the power flickered out. Total blackness swallowed the halls. The emergency lights never kicked on. The silence was so complete I could hear my own pulse. Then came the crying. Not faint anymore. Loud. Everywhere. It echoed from the vents, From behind doors, from the walls themselves, dozens of children sobbing, wailing, calling for help. My chest seized as I stumbled forward, flashlight jerking. The footprints appeared again, wet, smearing across the tile, leading me straight to the storage room. This time, the door was wide open. Inside, the shelves shook violently. My flashlight beam swept over small figures darting between shadows. Children, hospital gowns hanging off their bodies, eyes sunken, skin gray and peeling. Their faces all blurred, shifting. Some stood crying against the walls. Others just watched me, silently, with mouths open too wide. The girl from before stepped forward, tilting her head. Her face rippled like liquid, features forming for just a moment. I thought I saw her eyes, hollow, empty sockets dripping with black tears. And then they all screamed. Not voices, not words, just a single deafening shriek that shook the shelves. My flashlight burst, plunging me into darkness. I ran blind, smashing into boxes, clawing at the doorway until I spilled into the hall. Behind me, the voices hissed in unison. "You'll never leave us." I bolted for the elevators, slamming the button over and over until the doors opened. When I stumbled inside, I swear I saw them at the end of the hall. Dozens of small figures crowded together in the dark, watching as the doors slid shut. I quit the next morning. Didn't even collect my last check. It was only later that I learned the truth. 15 years ago, a fire broke out on the 6th floor. The backup generators failed. Machines keeping children alive in recovery rooms shut down. At least 3 died, maybe more. Families sued. The hospital settled quietly, shut the wing down and called it renovations. But the children never left. Every night cleaner hears them eventually. The crying, the whispers. Some last weeks, some only a night. Nobody makes it more than a month. It's been years since I left St. Mary's, but sometimes when I walk past an alley or wake up at 3 a.m., I swear I hear that same faint crying. And I know what it means. You don't leave the 6th floor. The 6th floor leaves with you.